military chiefs meet up in in Botswana, Gaborone. And what's funny was that one of the African members was left out, and the others seemed to be perplexed as to why. I will share. And it's a case of the African Command. So we get this story from the Voice of America. It says Zimbabwe sideline as U.S. African Command conference kicks off in Gaborone. You see everybody with the, looking all prim and proper.
Yes.
So the lead goes.
You know how traditionally.
Yeah.
I don't know about your village, but in my village, I remember when I used to go visit my my late granddad, maternal granddad.
Mm-hmm.
The guy loved me, man. So he would say, Milton, pick. This is when I was like 7 or 8 years old. Pick the biggest chicken, right, that you want us to have cooked for you today. So the first time, I was perplexed, so I pointed at it, right?
Okay.
I said, okay, very good. And then, one of the other kids there came with a bowl of grains and started feeding the chicken. It didn't make sense to me. They fed the chicken came, I assume the chicken was happy, ate, and then they took him to the back, and it was history. I was consuming the chicken later on. So this thing reminds me of that. They're being fed. Look at that. Look at the picture. They're being fed.
Okay.
Before they take them behind the house,
Okay, so the lead goes, the list goes, Gaborone, defense chiefs drawn from 32 African nations, excluding Zimbabwe, are attending a 2-day U.S. African Command Conference in Gaborone, Botswana, focusing on the security situation on the continent. Okay. Hold that thought. Security situation on the continent. A senior U.S. official attending the conference says Botswana included Zimbabwe in the list of participants, but Washington objected. Now, hold that thought as well. Now, bearing in mind, we're talking about the African continent. You reject Zimbabwe's attendance. We take instructions from our civilian leadership because some of the policies in Zimbabwe, the Security Council said they will not be invited to the conference, a spokesman said. But that is not to say we cannot learn lessons from Zimbabwe. I want to push back on the statement that we are isolating Zimbabwe. That's not the intent. The intent is that we come in when we are asked. If any African partner wants support or wants us to help in a certain region, that is what we help with. Now, the reason as to why Zimbabwe has not been invited could possibly be this. Zimbabwe President Mnangagwa, in a meeting with Russian leader Vladimir Putin earlier this month, said his country was being isolated by the US. He said America are aiding neighbors, Malawi and Zambia, with security and military support. And where is it? US imposed targeted sanctions on Mnangagwa and his inner circles over alleged corruption, human rights violation, and election rigging. The Southern African nation has strong relations with Russia, backdating to the country's 1960 liberation war. Its support for Russian invasion of Ukraine has, however, angered the West. Meanwhile, officially opening the conference, Botswana President Mngozweni Masisi expressed concern over Africa's spate of military coups. He said undemocratic removal of leadership presents a challenge for the country's security chief. It is imperative that we come together as one cohesive force to achieve Africa's noble vision of silencing the guns by 2030 and ensuring peace and stability across the continent, he said. Your thoughts, sir?
All right. First of all, the story is an example of very poor journalism on the part of Voice of America. The journalism is very weak. The quality, it's not in depth. So the story is almost like a manufactured and forced story. There's some things I can say about it, but essentially it's a non-story story.
Okay.
because the analysis is very shoddy. So while some of the things said could be true, they're very insignificant,
Yep.
right? Because first of all, why are you picking this story and focusing on Zimbabwe if you're telling us that only 32 countries were represented? You know, just think about that. Only 32 represented, which means 22
With nowhere to be
others
found.
were not there as well. So why is Zimbabwe supposed to be so conspicuous? So on that element alone, the editing is very weak. The editor should have said to this journalist that this is weak journalism. And it could be that, possible that the U.S. wanted to send a little message to President Mnangagwa of Zimbabwe and sent a press release that triggered this story. Zimbabwe not to attend, a U.S. security conference, Africa Security Council. It might have been generated like that. It was generated somehow. But a good journalist and the journalist editor would have said, wait a minute, there are too many missing elements here. Obviously, they're not going to invite the president of Burkina Faso to this conference, right?
True.
So would that not be the lead, actually? They're not going to invite the president of Niger, right?
Yeah.
Or Mali, right?
Guinea.
Of Guinea. So there are bigger stories there. Why are all these leaders not coming to this conference? And then the things you said about that could be worthy of interest and sustain a whole article. So once you point out, what I just mentioned, you see how insignificant the way this article is written. On the other hand, it could be that there's a lot in this article that the journalist knows or does not know, and the editor know or does not know as well. Because obviously, if you are supposedly punishing Mnangagwa for having a close relationship with Russia, that's just utter nonsense. South Africa invited Putin for the BRICS conference. He just could not come because they did not want to take the risk of the ICC had already issued an indictment. So South Africa, under law, would have been obligated to arrest him. So he attended via video hookup. So who has a closer working relationship with Russia? Is it Zimbabwe? Or is it a major country like South Africa? So once again, the story fails on its own premises. However, there's one premise that is possible. And that premise could be that they are sending a signal to the ANC government in South Africa. Stay away from the land issue. Otherwise, we will treat you the way we treat Mnangagwa and Zimbabwe. Europeans have never forgiven Zimbabwe for taking the land from the European descendants of their European ancestors who stole the land from African ancestors after killing Africans. They never forgive for that. So now, Zimbabwe, in fact, has reversed, not really reversed, but Zimbabwe a few years ago took out a loan, or at least committed to take a loan of $3 billion or more to buy this land back, to pay the Europeans, rather, from who the land was taken, to pay them compensation.
For stolen land.
The land issue in Zimbabwe itself is not as pressing as it was. And in fact, most of the sanctions have already been lifted. You see? Where is the land issue potentially pressing and not yet been dealt with? And the answer is South Africa. And it will become even much more critical now that we have an alliance of the ANC and the white-led party in South Africa, the Democratic Alliance. So if I read the way I'm reading this story, it's not actually for Zimbabwe at all. It is a warning to the ANC leadership in South Africa.
Okay. Can I also add?
Yes.
I see the hands of neocolonialism here, because if we're talking about the African continent and quote unquote security concerns, Botswana, where the conference was held, is deep in the belly of the continent. We're talking south-south.